I wanted to be anything but me. I wanted to be anything but brown and Muslim, basically, because those things were a source of tremendous friction in the UK. I had learned, obviously, that the best way of surviving and doing well was basically trying to distance myself from my culture and from my background as much as possible, and trying to be as Anglified or as white as I could be. You're always trying really, really hard to basically find a way for these people to accept you. I recognized that, unfortunately, the beard had become a point of contention in my ability to actually climb the career ladder. Having a huge beard on my face was a big burden to carry. Psychologically, it impacted me a lot because it made me think less of myself. So I almost started believing that I was incapable. Started seeing myself as an imposter. Started seeing myself as someone that was not smart or intelligent or being able to do things just because of the way that I looked.
Have you ever experienced burnout or any kind of mental health issues?
I was chronically stressed and I was internalizing everything. And so that's what led to that path of going down the route of therapy. I essentially had a nervous breakdown from all the pressures of life, so many things. It wasn't just one thing. I never thought when I was in my 20s and my 30s that I would be one of those guys that would have a nervous breakdown, that would end up on antidepressants, that would have heart problems, given the fact that I exercise so much, that would end up in therapy. Clearly, something's gone so horribly wrong. You failed as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a colleague. You failed. That's how I felt. But I think generally in a society where men are supposed to be strong and we're not supposed to talk about our problems, who do you turn to?
So what did recovery look like to you? There comes a moment when, from the outside, someone seems confident and put together, but internally, they may be questioning whether they truly belong. For many men out there, especially those juggling responsibilities, this conflict isn't something that they talk about. Yet, it shapes how they think, how they act, and how they see themselves. Today, we're unpacking this tension. Welcome to Reflections and Realizations. I'm Alvina, and I'm joined by Shahbaz Khan. Shahbaz is a father of 3, a working professional. He's curious, he trains hard, and he's always learning. But what stands out about Shahbaz isn't what he does, it's the fact that he keeps on choosing growth even when it's uncomfortable. Shahbaz, I'm so glad you're here.
I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you for having me.
It's quite a feat, me managing to get my husband on the mic in public.
Yeah, you had to convince me. It wasn't exactly something which, this. I wasn't particularly keen or excited about having my face on the camera, but I think we talked about this. We talked about the need to have voices on a podcast where we essentially talk about really important issues. And I think what we're about to talk about is really important in the realm of mental health, particularly for men, which is not really an area which is spoken about much in today's day and age. So I'm looking forward to it.
So I'm glad I've managed to get you here.
Yeah.
So Shahbaz, I'm going to start by asking you, before anyone knew you as a father, as a working professional, what did the young Shahbaz believe about himself?
I was born and raised in London, southwest London. Parents migrated to the UK from Pakistan in the 1970s, I think. They got married in the UK. I was born in the 1980s. We grew up in a household where there was a lot of love, but you could feel the tension in terms of the fact that we didn't have much. And there was a lot of financial pressure on my parents. That was quite obvious. So even though growing up, you have aspirations and you have dreams of doing things like becoming a cricket player, for example, which is something which I used to love watching cricket when I was a kid. Or alternatively, another phase that I went through when I was a kid was, late 1980s, early 1990s, Top Gun was the movie that was really up and coming. And then I remember watching that and thinking, I want to be like Maverick, and I really want to actually become an Air Force pilot. And for a period of time, there was a short period of time where I actually really wanted to become an Air Force pilot. But it was just one of those things which just seemed quite unreachable. It wasn't something which was potentially something that I could do. So I guess those were the kind of things that I wanted to do growing up as a kid, but then,
But that's what's interesting.
Yeah.
At what point does that little boy realize that he can't be a pilot, he can't be a cricket player, he can't be these exciting things? Like, at what point did you realize that I have to make more of a sensible decision?
I started having that realization, I think, probably around the age of, 11 or 10 or 11, where I recognized that in order for me to do something with my life, I needed to do it through academia, through my studies, through working hard, and find something secure. And I think that kind of ethos or that kind of mentality was drilled into me from around the age of about, I'd say, 8 or 9, because what essentially ended up happening was when I was around 6, my father made the decision to migrate us to Pakistan, and we moved to Karachi. We lived there for about 3.5 years. And, I was very lucky in the sense that when I went to school, I started doing really, really well. I was coming top of the class in all the grades and all the different subject matters. And then when I came back to the UK at the age of 9 in 1993, my teachers at primary school recognized pretty quickly that I had some sort of had wouldn't say gifted, but I was smart. I was able to excel in school, and so they had that conversation with my parents. It was not something that my dad found easy to engage in because he didn't quite understand the whole world of academia. My mum was much more engaged in it, and she was the one that really, around the age of 9, kind of put this idea in my head that if you work hard and if you apply yourself and we give you all the tools to basically learn and really excel in studies, you can do something really, really amazing with your life and your future. But it was very much centered around a stable career or a job in that sense. So that kind of mentality was kind of honed into me from around the age of 9 or 10. So that's essentially when it kind of started, that kind of shift in thinking started to happen.
I have to ask you, Bas, you were a British boy in a school in Pakistan.
Right.
And then you were maybe a Pakistani kid who were then placed back to the UK in a school in the UK.
Yeah.
Was that difficult?
Yeah, it was. I think what people don't realize is this, right? People just assume that have not been born and raised in your background. And I'm talking about people, for example, in the UK of Caucasian descent, for example, or if, for example, if you come to this region and you speak to people that are indigenous to this part of the world, they just see you as a skin color and they assume that's who you are. And they don't quite understand the nuance behind it, the background. Okay, fine, you might be Pakistani, but you've been born and raised in the UK. You may not necessarily speak the language of your parents, right? And so vice versa, when you go to Pakistan, and I remember going to Pakistan when I was around 6 years old, I was fortunate in the sense that obviously I was raised in a household where my parents were both speaking Urdu, which is obviously the national language of Pakistan. They were both speaking Urdu with me the whole time. So I was fluent in conversing in the language, understanding it, speaking it.
Did you have an accent?
A little bit, but I was actually quite good. I was actually, I didn't have, I know what you mean. It's like an anglicized kind of accent. So like, and I speak to a lot of like my friends as well, like particularly friends that speak Arabic that have been born and raised in the West. And they're like, we speak Arabic, but whenever we speak Arabic, people can tell we're not really native Arabs because we have a slight American or slight anglicized twang to the way we speak Arabic. Same thing in Urdu. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there was a little bit of that, but I think mine was actually, I actually managed to mask it pretty well. It was hard to adjust because even though I was conversant in Urdu, speaking fluently, I couldn't read or write it very well. That was hard. And the biggest, I think, shock to my system was I remember being 6 years old, turning up to an Urdu class. Miss Farhad, who was the Urdu teacher at that time, basically thought that I was messing around, that I couldn't read or write because she asked me to write something down and copy it from the blackboard. Back then, obviously in the 1990s, you had blackboards, you didn't have whiteboards. And this is Pakistan as well, right? So, and I just looked at the language on the blackboard and I was like, I don't know how to kind of write this. I mean, obviously I learned a bit of alphabets and that kind of stuff, but not really to the extent that I could rewrite it. And she came around and she just slapped me across the back of my head, grabbed me by the ear, twisted it, wrote it in my whiteboard, said a few bad things about how useless and terrible I am, basically, and then just kind of walked off. That was a really shocking experience for me. And that's probably my earliest memory of schooling in Pakistan.
Because that's nothing like the school you probably attended in the UK.
Never. No, not at all. And that's the thing, right? It's a real cultural shock, because it's like, I've never been hit by a teacher before, So that kind of immediately just puts you in almost like a protective kind of mode, where you're like, okay, right, you kind of go into your shell, and you start to. I mean, I was never scared of teachers, but I started to feel quite fearful of certain teachers in Pakistan. So I thought to myself, discipline is so important, and you have to be really, really polite and respectful. And you can't even look at your teacher in a funny way, because they'll basically slap you and that kind of thing. Because in Pakistan, there's still very much, this concept of corporal punishment, which is not prevalent or existent in the UK anymore. So that was really hard. And I think the good thing was this, right? Because I spoke English fluently, I was one of the cool kids in some ways in my school. Like, people wanted to be with me because, okay, he speaks English really, really well.
And come from England.
Yeah, the parents would turn around and say to their kids, stick around Shahbaz, he speaks English so well. If you hang around with him and you speak to him in English, you'll just start speaking just like him, because he has a lovely accent. So there's a lot of that. So I managed to, in that sense, integrate. And also, the other cool thing about Pakistan is all the kids and parents there are very much focused on doing really well at school, right? But because it's a fee-paying system, right? It's not like the UK where essentially, you go to school and education is free. It's a fee-paying system. Parents are putting their kids through an education and paying for it, right? So and with the culture and mentality, all the kids are coming there and they're like, we want to learn and we want to basically do really, really well, and want to be around kids that are excelling really well. And we want to compete with them as well and do the best and get the best marks in the class, because there's a real competition in Pakistan to do well, because you can only, through doing really, really well, actually get the best jobs in Pakistan, because it's a developing country, right? It's not as easy or accessible to get good jobs or careers there. So there's very much that kind of mentality there. So it really paved or worked in my benefit that I was hardworking, I was relatively smart. And so I excelled in class. And so as a result of that, I became quite popular with those kids. I was getting top of the class. And so that was cool. But on the flip side, they all kind of treated me like a foreigner as well, because they knew that I couldn't speak Urdu very well. They knew I was a little bit not streetwise.
So you were the cool kid in Pakistan.
Yeah.
And then when you came back to England, were you the cool kid in the UK as well?
No, not at all. I managed to fit back into schooling relatively okay. But primary school wasn't too bad, actually. And one of the things about primary school or elementary school, whatever word you want to use to describe it, it's quite protective. It's quite pastoral. It's there to kind of make sure kids are safe and happy and going to an environment where they're basically enjoying learning. And there's no real sense of pushing children to become academically successful, particularly in the UK, in primary school. Less so, I think, in Pakistan. In Pakistan, when I got there, at the age of 6, they were saying, you got to do really, really well, essentially. So you were basically having to compete and work really hard and study really, really hard to get good marks. Not so much in the UK, in primary school. At least that was my experience. And the area that I was born and raised in Tooting in southwest London. It was a very much a working class, blue collar kind of area, rough. You had a lot of immigrants that lived in Tooting, from people from India, Pakistan. In late 1990s, you had a huge influx from Somalia. Early noughties, after 9/11, you had a lot of people from Afghanistan moved to London, particularly southwest London. So the kind of demographic that it was attracting, it came with, and some of these people were coming from countries where they've experienced war and persecution. And then they're coming into southwest London, and you are meeting these people and their children and interacting with them. And it can be quite scary. And it can, and those being around those people, can get quite violent, can get quite rough. So I was surrounded by kids like that in my primary school, just to kind of paint an idea of what it was like. I was one of just a bunch of working class kids, basically, or kids of working class parents, or kids of migrants, basically, that were in the same place. So I managed to blend in because of the fact that there were a lot of kids that were of the same demographic as me, brown kids, kids of Afro-Caribbean background, or black kids. It was easy. So I didn't really struggle so much in primary school. The real difficulty was when I actually moved to secondary school. And we can talk about that if you want a bit as well. That was quite a challenge, I thought. Yeah.
What were some of the things you struggled with in high school?
My parents obviously were working blue collar jobs. My mum wasn't even working when I was like young. It was just my dad, and my dad was between jobs. And so my father was very much concerned with and distracted with just making sure there was bread on the table and that the bills were being paid, because that was a real struggle. It really was. And I remember growing up feeling that tension in our household, feeling that we don't have enough money, essentially. We don't have enough. Money was that word which I remember throughout my entire youth in London, was we don't have money, and we're poor, and we are struggling, essentially. And so I applied myself, I think, to academia. I think the defining moment for me was, I still remember it. I was year 6, so final year of elementary school or primary school. Parents' evening. And my parents were called in, and Mr. Millington, who was my year 6 teacher, who I will never forget to this day, Alan Millington, he's the man that essentially, I think, changed my life, or had an instrumental part in changing my life and changing the trajectory of my life to going from a rough neighborhood to where I am today, essentially. And I remember him saying to me, are your parents going to come to parents' evening? And I was like, yeah, my mom's going to come. And he's like, no, tell your parents that your dad also needs to come. And I was like, I got a bit worried. I thought, why am I in trouble? Like, classic, why do you want my dad to be there as well? My dad doesn't really, he's too busy with his work. But I relayed the message. I went back home. I said to my mum, I said, Mr. Millington was saying that both of you have to come. My mum was looking at me and she just said, is everything okay? And I said, I swear I've done nothing wrong. She goes, have you been in any fights? I was like, no, none of that. Anyway, so they both turned up. I didn't go to it. And what essentially he had told them, this obviously is secondhand information because I wasn't there, was he turned around and said, he goes, your kid is the brightest kid in the class. And I was head boy of the school as well, which was really cool, by the way. I was so cool. And he just said, he said that, I'm telling all the other parents that they should apply and send their kids to this comprehensive school and that comprehensive school. But I think that Shahbaz is good enough to go for the 11 plus at grammar schools, and even go for an 11 plus examination at private schools, completely independent schools. You pay fees, nothing cheap. We're talking about it in 1995 when I went to secondary school. 10, 11,000 pounds. Back then, this is like 30 years ago now. So you have your fee paying schools and you can't go to them unless you're paying fees. However, in those days, what the Conservative government was doing, so this is a scheme that was brought in by the Conservative Party, or maybe even by the Labour Party earlier on, around the time when John Major was Prime Minister, was they had an assisted place scheme. So if you were bright and smart, you could go and sit an examination in some of these private schools like Dulwich and Emmanuel and all these other schools. And you could actually, if you were good enough and you got good enough marks, you could get a place in the school, and the government would give you something called an assisted place, where the government would actually pay your fees to go to that private school. And so Mr. Millington sat down with my parents one evening, I think in November of 1994, and just basically filled out forms for 3 or 4 private schools and said, I'm going to send these off for you. And then my mum at that point went on a mission. She made it, I think, her mission in 1994, December, to basically just drill me and hothouse me for these examinations. I remember, like, it was December 1994. We've had to fly back to Pakistan to attend my cousin's wedding. Everyone was getting ready for the wedding, and my mum was there sitting there with me saying, finish this paper, finish this past paper, finish this verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning, finish this math paper. And so basically she drilled me for 3-4 months continuously to get ready. And, alhamdulillah, as a result of that, I managed to get an assisted place at a private school. That really changed the trajectory of where my life went from there. That's essentially how I got there.
So tell me about your school years at Emmanuel.
So it was, I am deeply grateful and really privileged to have had the education that I did at Emmanuel. It wasn't without its challenges. Secondary school is a real shock to the system because it's not like primary school in the sense that all of a sudden, overnight or just over the summer, you're expected to start acting like an adult in many ways. You're expected to be organized. You're expected to sit down and do homework for 30, 45 minutes to an hour, maybe even an hour and a half every single day. In my case, I was quite lucky that Broadwater Primary School was a 5-minute walk away from my house in Tooting. But Emmanuel School was a bus ride away. I had to take a bus, the 219 from Southwest, from Tooting all the way to Clapham Junction. And I didn't know how to take a bus. I had to learn how to take a bus. That was scary. Imagine someone like that starting in a private school where 85%, I would say comfortably 85 to 90% of the kids are from rich, privileged, predominantly Caucasian backgrounds. You have nothing in common with these kids. Nothing. The kind of conversations they have are completely alien to you. The holidays they go on, the car their mum and dad drives, the stationery they may have, the clothes they wear, the things they get up to on the weekends. It's just the kind of stuff that you just don't understand or comprehend because you've never actually experienced it in your whole life. And then in addition to that, you have to also understand that these kids from this demographic, from this middle class, upper class demographic where their parents can very comfortably pay £10,000 a year for school fees, you can appreciate that the kind of areas they live in, they're not really raised or surrounded by people of my skin color, right? Or people of my kind of religious background. It's really weird for them. They don't know how to behave around you. They're not intending to do it. Well, actually, sometimes they were intending to do it. But there is this level of prejudice and racism which you're subjected to. Some of them don't do it intentionally. It's just because they've been raised in a background. You've got to remember, this is not 2020. This is 1995, 1996. 30 years ago, things were very different in the UK. You still had very high levels of religious tolerance and racial tolerance in the UK, but there was still a lot of prejudice and racism, in all facets of British community.
So did you struggle to fit in? Did you feel you were different? Did you feel that you were a minority and that this wasn't your world?
I think it's very easy for media and for the majority demographic to vilify certain sectors and certain backgrounds within a community country. And actually, it's really pertinent that we're actually raising this point right now because that's exactly what's happening in London right now. What's exactly what's happening in the UK right now again. It's a repetition of what's been happening over the last 30, 40 years, where a certain demographic just starts getting vilified because of a very, very tiny, tiny portion of bad actors within that community, right? So it was really hard, I remember, I'd heard the word Paki a few times when I was a kid, maybe say, the age of 10 or 11. I heard the word Paki in school, secondary school, a lot. And reflecting back on that, it was abhorrent and it was completely unacceptable. But this is the 1990s. And my main focus when I was at secondary school was I wanted to become someone and I wanted to achieve something with my life. I was obsessed with that kind of ambition. It gave me the hunger to actually go into school every day and work really hard and study really, really hard. But just to give you an example, and going back to your question, was it hard? It was really hard because the vast majority of the kids, I mean, there were a few Asian kids there. There were. And there were a few kids just like my background. And to be honest, we'd hang out with them because you felt familiar with them and you felt safe with them. You felt safe with them. That was the most important thing, right? It wasn't because you were trying to form your own clique. You felt comfortable with them because they knew you, they understood you. And just to give you an example of the level of bullying that I was subjected to when I was in my school, because, okay, so let's take a step back. You're in a school where everyone is of that demographic, right? Very, very privileged background. They're not really comfortable, familiar with working with, dealing with, having friends of your background. So there is that element of disconnect, so to speak. Let's just put it in that way. And for some strange reason, and mainly down to the fact that it's lack of familiarity, they treat you a little bit like an alien. How they were raised had very, very bigoted and I would say extreme views on Muslims and on Indians and Pakistanis and even black people. The kind of jokes that they would make were quite disgusting. The classic playground racist jokes, pretty bad. You would be marginalized. I loved cricket as a kid. I absolutely loved it. I mean, I remember growing up and I was 6 years old and we moved to Pakistan, and I won't forget 1992 because I was 8 years old, and that was the year in which Imran Khan was the captain of the Pakistan cricket team and they won the World Cup. They won the Cricket World Cup in 92. I remember being 8 years old and the celebrations and how wild it was in Karachi. And people literally just them out everywhere, and the screaming and shouting. It was pandemonium. It was awesome. So cricket was something which I absolutely loved. I mean, it was such an amazing sport. And watching, those people, those superstars perform, and obviously, as a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old going into secondary school, and you have the opportunity to go to a middle-class school where you get to be part of the first 11 in cricket. And obviously, in England, cricket is a big thing. It's very traditional. It's not like football, which obviously it's more of a working class kind of sport, played by the working class. Sports like rugby, fencing, cricket, rowing, which Emmanuel School offered, all four of those things. They're very much gentrified, middle class, upper class kind of sports, which the gentlemen essentially partook in, right? So you can just imagine me walking in with very tatty, cheap cricket whites, not like, these are branded stuff because my parents couldn't afford it. And all the white kids who had been playing for, Surrey under 12s and London and all these other nice little cricket clubs, playing for them, looking at you and going, who the hell are you, essentially? But you've turned up for the love of the game. You've turned up because you really want to play and you just want to enjoy it because your vision of cricket is that image, 1992 World Cup, seeing all these superstars and watching a lot of cricket and playing a lot of cricket on the streets.
So were you good?
I wasn't terrible. I actually thought it was okay. I wasn't fantastic. I wasn't going to be the next,
Imran Khan.
The next Imran Khan, the next, Brian Lara or Tendulkar, whichever player you want to play. But I enjoyed it. I was a pretty decent bowler, and I could bat a bit as well. My fielding was appalling, and I think that became a real source of pretty violent and aggressive bullying at school. And I think when I turned up and started playing cricket at school, there was a particular gentleman, but he was the captain of the cricket team. Let's be fair here. I wasn't great, but I wasn't terrible either. My fielding wasn't fantastic, and I dropped a few catches. And then the classic, they'd start saying these really nasty things like, oh yeah, of course, he's Pakistani. The Pakistani cricket team is already really rubbish at fielding and they're lazy and useless. And they started basically kind of painting with the same kind of brush. So that real kind of racism kind of coming through. And I started hating it, you know. I played for 2-3 years. And then when I got to about 16, when I was at school, I was like, I don't want to play anymore. But by that point, I'd been playing for the first 11 and the second 11 quite a bit at school anyway. So the PE teachers were now forcing me to turn up. They're like, no, you're okay. And you're a pretty decent player. You have to turn up, otherwise you'll get in trouble kind of thing. So I had to force myself. I was being forced to turn up on Saturday morning to these games. Those guys didn't want me there. They didn't want me there at all. They disliked me. And it was mainly racially motivated, I think. There was an element of also, I probably did take myself quite seriously there, because these are the same kind of boys or teenagers that on their weekends were going out to parties, clubs, engaging in recreational drugs, potentially trying alcohol for the first time, 15, 16, having girlfriends, not really caring about studying, I was focused. I was laser sharp focused on what I wanted to do. I was like, and my mum drilled this in me. She was like, you are at private school where your fees are being paid by the government. You have got great opportunities in front of you. Use them, work really hard, get the best results that you can get. So I was laser focused on what I wanted to do. I wanted to go there and I wanted to basically study hard. And I think it's not like Pakistan where everyone's competing with each other and they want to basically be the best. A lot of the kids that saw me there that weren't particularly focused or didn't really care about their academia because they're from rich white families, they teased me for it. They saw me coming first, second, third in the class regularly in my exams or in tests. Maybe there's an element of jealousy. Maybe it's the fact that I took myself a bit too seriously. And I think a big part was it the fact that I was a certain skin color. I wasn't particularly good looking. In primary school, I had braces. I was obese. Back then we didn't know much about nutrition and exercise. And, our parents' way of kind of giving us love in the best way that they thought they could give us love was by feeding us.
Because food was love.
Food was love, Mum would make amazing dishes for us over the evening. We'd have lots of good food. We didn't have any kind of understanding. And this is the thing, right? When you come from an underprivileged background, people think that it's a double whammy. You don't have access to opportunities. And what do I mean by that? I mean in the sense that you don't get to access a demographic or a group of people that can help you to learn to grow and become more intelligent. Not more intelligent, but learn more, basically, and develop more. Okay, it was the 1990s, so there wasn't much literature or education on health and fitness and strength training, all that kind of stuff 30 years ago. But there still was. The reason why there was this issue in our communities in Southwest London was because when you are underprivileged and all you're focused on is trying to bring food on the table, you don't really know much about or care much about health and fitness and diet and exercise, and taking on stress, and smoking is bad for you, all that kind of stuff. And so, our parents did the very best they could with the knowledge and the tools that they had.
So Shahbaz,
Yeah.
I have to ask, in your early years in your school in Pakistan, you experienced discipline from your teacher that made you probably quite fearful, made you maybe shrink, maybe keep yourself small to keep yourself safe. And then later on as well, you experienced bullying in a manual school. And I'm presuming that you also learned to shrink and make yourself small to keep yourself safe. Do you feel these early years experiences have then also later shaped how you've shown up in life?
When you're raised in a country in a certain time of, or in a certain epoch, 1990s or 1980s, and there is a lot of unfamiliarity with who you are and your background and hostility, your focus is purely on survival. You develop traits to manage situations and manage people. And one of those things that I kind of developed was people pleasing, shrinking myself, making myself smaller, because by not bringing attention to myself, I then reduced or minimized or mitigated the chances of someone basically abusing me, whether that's physically or emotionally, whether that's through essentially engaging in a fist fight at school to calling me a paki. And also it's a cultural thing. We have to talk about the fact that, you know, Muslim and cultures that are influenced by Islam very much impose this thing in their families and in the familial system where, you know, you're respectful, you're quiet, you're humble, you're modest, you're respectful to your elders, even if they are saying the most disgusting and rudest and nastiest things to you, and essentially shaming you or essentially acting out their own trauma on you, essentially.
But you can't say anything.
But you can't say anything. It's unspeakable. You would never dare to speak out against them, even though they may be acting like a child. You're talking about people that are in their 40s and 50s acting like kids, engaging in spats and arguments over the most trivial things. And so you had to learn to kind of manage those kind of people and live with those people and just kind of survive. And so I very much developed this attitude when I was a teenager that try and find ways to minimize the friction in your life. You know, try and find ways to do things that don't cause too much hassle and trouble, not just for yourself, but also for your mother and your family and your siblings, whatever. So if someone says something to you and they're being rude, just
let it go. Just
smile and laugh about it. And that became my default state. If someone's making fun of me, just laugh about it with them. I mean, no one has any idea when someone says something really cruel or horrible or pointed or nasty at someone. No one has any idea of what it does to someone on the inside, how it impacts them, how it may sit with them for years, the trauma it has. No one has any idea of it.
I'm also thinking that a lot of the abuse and the bullying that you faced growing up in the West was because you were brown, because you were Pakistani. So I have to ask, did you have moments growing up where you wished that you wasn't brown?
Oh, all the time. All the time. Being an ethnic minority in a country which historically has been institutionally racist is really hard. No one talks about this. I was 16 years old when 9/11 took place. And I think I was 21 when the events of 7/7 took place. A lot of people, and rightly so, and understandably so, talk about the impact that both of those events had on the American and the British populations. And rightly so. Rightly so. What happened in those 2 days was unspeakable. It was horrific to watch. The carnage that it caused and the repercussions of it. People forget the repercussions of what 9/11 did. You know, the subsequent wars, the subsequent racial hatred, the subsequent Islamophobia. No one really talks about that because that fallout, to talk about that fallout and to address that fallout in many people's minds is to minimize 9/11 or 7/7 and the events of it itself. And I think that's unfair. I think that's deeply unfair because I remember when those two events took place, the vilification of people of our skin color and of our religious background. And it wasn't actually, interesting enough, it wasn't just Muslims. I remember having conversations at university with Sikh friends and Hindu friends. And they were being subjected to racism. Seeing those two events unfold and then the way that people started behaving towards me after that, it was very jarring in the sense that I then felt the need to once again adapt myself, once again change the way that I behaved. I almost felt as if my behavior, my body language and the way I interact with people, I was constantly feeling the need to overcompensate.
Or apologize.
And apologize, exactly. You wouldn't talk about religion, you wouldn't talk about politics deliberately because it's like, oh, people would literally be gagging for you to say something so they could attack you. That's essentially what it was. You would sit in gatherings at university, for example, or even when I was doing my A-levels at school, and you would see people, they wanted you to say something. They wanted you to kind of give your views on what's your view on what happened on 9/11, and what do you think of so-and-so and this and that? What do you think about the war that's taking place? They wanted you to talk about it and express your views because they wanted to kind of confirm the bias in their mind that you're an extremist and that you support this kind of behavior and you're actually happy this happened. Of course I'm not. And a lot of abuse was being held towards us indirectly and directly as a result of that. People in the streets, but just small things like being stopped and searched at London Underground regularly. The way that I remember after 7/7 took place, I was actually in the middle of an internship at a really prestigious law firm. I was 21 years old. The partners, the way they looked at me on the following day after 7/7, I could tell, you could tell that there was some, I wasn't quite sure what they were thinking, but they were almost, I could see in their minds that they'd vilified me. I was a young 21-year-old aspiring student that wanted to be a solicitor or a lawyer, essentially, doing a 2-week placement in a law firm, trying to get a job. So
Shahbaz, when I met you in our early 20s,
it's the worst decision of your life.
you had a beard on your face. It was wide, it was long, and it was really thick. And the reason why I'm raising this is because so far you've just spoke about not fitting in, being treated differently, being brown and, Pakistani, and how you're treated in school. And then why would you then grow a long beard and fit in even less? What was going on in your life?
Okay. That's a fair question. So obviously we've covered secondary school. I did really well at secondary school. I did phenomenal in my GCSEs, if I say so myself, without blowing my trumpet.
What did you get, Shahbaz? Come on, tell the audience. I know you want to.
No, but it's changed now, right? So now they've got like numbers. So
I know, but it still corresponds.
987. Like now they've got A star plus or an A star star.
So what were your grades?
So back in my day when I was doing my GCSEs, you just had the highest grade you had was A star, right? A star was the highest grade you'd get. So I got 7 A stars and 3 A's.
Mashallah. Well done, Shahbaz.
My older sister was a massive source of inspiration for me, and she continues to be. In fact, both my sisters are amazing in many different ways, but she was 4.5 years older than me, so I always looked up to her because she was my older sister, and I didn't have any brothers. She went and pursued a law degree. And back then, there's a lot of law programs. I mean, some of your audience may know them, may not. Things like Ali McBeal was quite prevalent.
I watched that.
Yeah, I watched that as well. It's completely removed from what real lawyers actually do. So you'd see these kind of programs like Ali McBeal. You saw like films like A Few Good Men, with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. And you're like, yeah, I want to be a lawyer. Lawyers are badass. Like, they're cool, man. Look at the way they argue and they look so suave and smooth. They come up with really slick arguments. I want to be just like that. And my older sister went off to UCL and she read law there. And I was like, I want to be just like her. And, this is a question that you asked earlier. So I want to go back to that because it is relevant. Growing as a kid, I wanted to obviously maybe be a cricketer or be Maverick from Top Gun, basically, and become an Air Force pilot. But, as you grew older and you saw the financial struggles that your parents were going through, the reality or the dream kind of shifted from, I don't want to chase my dream anymore. My dream now is not to live the life that I'm currently living right now. My dream is to get out of this.
And education's your ticket.
And education is my passport, my ticket to essentially get out of this and make a much more prosperous and better life for myself. My biggest fear actually as a teenager, now that I think about it, was basically was staying where we were and being limited in my opportunities and not doing anything in my life. That was, I think, the biggest or the most scariest thing for me. I wanted to make something of myself, to have a better life. We live in we're very fortunate, you and I. Obviously, we've been in this region now for 16 years. And the vast majority of people that were around don't really understand or know what it's like to struggle with money. I talk to a lot of my Emirati friends. They very openly and honestly talk about the fact that they've never had to worry about money. But they say, we talk to our grandparents. And our grandparents had nothing. So they've gone through, or they've seen it generations back, how it is to basically live a life where you are struggling to make ends meet. And it gives you a real appreciation of life and of having these kind of things. The opportunities opened up, and my sister had read law, and I wanted to be just like her. And she'd gone through the process where I remember she was applying for a training contract. And so I was watching her go through that whole process, and I was looking through her books, like on all these amazing law firms. And the cool thing about it was that this guide had not just the law firms in it, it'd say starting salary. And the starting salaries was something ridiculous, like, obviously this is like 30 years ago, £22,000 a year, £24,000 a year. I was like, that's £2,000 a month. Like just unimaginable amount of money. Like, and so money was a big motivation. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go and pursue a career in law. And I went off to Bristol University and did a 4-year degree. When I got to university, I was away from my family. I felt a real void in my life. And I couldn't explain it. And I was very fortunate. My flatmate was an Egyptian, and we had nothing in common. I was like into music, and I was like really into hip hop and R&B, and I would dress in like, really cool clothes, like, wear the beanie hats. And Craig David was the guy at the time. Yeah, we was the guy. He was the one in Vogue at that time. So I remember sporting a Craig David beard. Like I had one of those things where like literally like the lines
the
here,
goatee.
like I had it all. I've got photos. I've got photos of it all. Like I literally had the lines like Craig David, and I'd wear that little beanie as well. And people actually used to laugh at me and say, "You look like an Asian Craig David." And I'm like, "Yes,
that's what I'm going for.
I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. Fantastic." So there was a lot of that, right? And like, but there was a real void in my heart, and I felt really, really lonely. And this Egyptian flatmate, Sharif, his name was, he was homesick as well. And so we bonded through the fact that we were both lonely and I felt homesick. And I just used to spend a lot of time with him. And he was deeply spiritual. He was deeply, deeply spiritual. And we would talk about God and afterlife and all that kind of stuff and prayer. And so slowly but surely, I started to kind of move away from the music scene, the DJing scene, and just like kind of spending more time with him. And I felt when I was with him, I felt at peace. Another thing which happened, within my secondary university, and I think this was a real critical turning point for me, was my mother's older brother and only brother. He died. And he was only 55 years old. And that was the first time that I had experienced death in the family. I was 19 years old. Seeing that was really shattering or life-shaking for me. Watching how everyone in our family was consumed by grief. Going to the mortuary and picking out his body, seeing him wrapped in the coffin, in the white clothing, essentially, being part of the janazah, the funeral process, being there physically when watching the community bury him under the ground. It really, it's like you just almost as if like, the best way to explain it is like you've been sleeping and then something like this happens and you just wake up. And I just woke up. I was like, this is real.
This is life.
This is life. And my mom or my uncle, he'd done really well for himself and, gave his family a very comfortable life. And he died. He didn't get a chance to really experience the pleasure of that. And then I thought to myself, I looked at it and I thought, this man's worked his entire life and he's not got a chance to experience. He's dead. Game's over. And that was a real moment of awakening for me at the age of 19. And I think that's what really drove me down my spiritual path, because then I started speaking to people. And then So the interesting thing about me was this. Going to school as I did, I had learned, obviously, that the best way of surviving and doing well was basically trying to distance myself from my culture and from my background as much as possible, and trying to be as Anglified or as white as I could be. And what that essentially entailed was also distancing myself from anyone that was the same color of skin as me as well. That was my survival technique. That was my survival mechanism. That was my way of trying to basically fit in with society.
That I might be brown, but I'm not really brown.
I'm going to disguise my background. Okay, I'm a different skin color to you, but
I'm just like you.
I'm just like you. Very much like, yeah. Like, you could talk about football, can talk about politics, can talk about, music and R&B and hip hop and that kind of stuff. And, same experiences, never about my background or it was Eid or quite funnily enough, I'm fasting. Everyone else is around me is eating and I'm fasting because it's Ramadan. And I'll make excuses. They'll go, let's go and have lunch. Oh no, I've got to go and basically get ready for the next tutorial. I'm actually fasting, so I've just gone off for an hour somewhere else by myself, but I don't want them to know I'm fasting because I'm embarrassed about it. Right? I don't want them, because then it leads to other questions. Oh, you're Muslim. Some of them didn't even know I was Muslim, by the way, because I kind of hid that. I was ashamed of it. I wanted to minimize that. I wanted to minimize and going back to your question, it was because I wanted to be anything but me. I wanted to be anything but brown and Muslim, basically, because those things were a source of tremendous friction in the UK. Yeah.
But you're saying you wanted to be anything but brown and Muslim.
Yeah.
And again, I'm questioning, where did the big beard come from?
So, all right. So let's
you couldn't be more brown and Muslim.
So let's talk. Okay. Let's talk about that then. Right. So I got to the age of 21. Obviously, my uncle had passed away, and I felt this real sense of void in my heart. And then I went off to Germany. And that was even more lonely. It was a fantastic experience, by the way, living in a foreign country and having to live there and immerse yourself in just speaking German day in, day out was such a tremendous exercise in growth. And I would highly recommend that to anyone. If you learn a foreign language or you're learning a foreign language, go and live in that country for a few months and just immerse yourself in the culture and language. It is such a great source of growth. And so I became even more lonely there. And then, it just happened that all my friends that were back at university in Bristol were firming up their accommodation for their final year university. And I was in Germany. So I was out of sight and out of mind. And so they kind of just forgot about me. And then when I came back to Bristol, I didn't have anywhere to live. And I had been, at that time, part of the Bristol University Islamic Society. So I had a few friends, a few Muslim friends in the Islamic Society that I was talking to and just basically spending some time with. And one of them turned around and said to me that, are you looking for a place to live? And I said, yeah, I've got nowhere to live right now. And they said, there is a house which is adjoined to a local mosque just down the road from where my lectures and tutorials were, in Kingsdown, in Bristol. And there is a room available there. I'm going to be honest with you, I was just like, I do not want to move there, because then I'm going to be under the supervision and vigilance of the entire Muslim community. If I'm coming home at 2:00 in the morning, they'll be like, where has he been? All that kind of stuff. It's a real imposition or restriction on my freedom. But I embraced it. I was like, you know what? Maybe this is a good thing. So I moved into this house in Kingsdown, which was attached to this small mosque. I made the best friends there. I had a Jordanian friend, a really good Palestinian friend, or British, a really good Bengali friend, and a Sudanese friend. All 5 of us lived there. And it was a really lovely community. I got to be part of, it was the first time in my life I felt accepted. And I felt I belonged somewhere. And I felt at peace. One thing which many people that are not of our background don't appreciate, it is such a privilege and such a blessing to feel as if you belong somewhere. Immigrants don't really get that feeling. We don't. okay, we moved to the UK, the US, Western Europe, wherever it may be, and we're a different color of skin. But we don't really, or back in my time, you're reminded that you're not really one of them. And so you always constantly feel as if you don't fit in. And this was the first time I was 21 years old, 2005. And I fitted in. These people, these brothers accepted me for who I was. They loved me. We ate together. We joked together. We played video games together, you know. And I was looking at them going, they're Muslims. They're British. They're just like me. They enjoy playing football. They enjoy talking about silly things like happening on TV and music. They enjoy playing video games. We'd stay up all night playing PlayStation or whatever. They're just like me. The only difference is that these guys pray. They pray regularly. And they read Quran. And they take their religion seriously. You know, it's important to them. And so that kind of led me down my path. I just found that when I started praying regularly, because obviously I lived in a house which was next to the mosque, there was no excuse for me not to pray, especially Fajr, because everyone would know. Literally, one of my housemates would literally go around our doors and knock and say Fajr, and we'd wake up and quickly rub our eyes, make wudu, run downstairs and go and pray Salat Fajr, even though it was like freezing in the middle of December. But you'd do it because obviously, if you didn't, people would know you weren't praying. So it was like almost like you were showing it. But it was a good thing. It kept the community together, right? And so I started doing that. And I felt a lot of tranquility and a lot of peace whenever I would pray, whenever I'd put my head on the prayer mat or whenever I do sujood. I felt validated, if that makes sense. I felt accepted. I can't explain it, but I've never felt so much peace and surrender at the same time when I've been putting my head in sujood, right? And that kind of just then led me down the rabbit hole. I thought, this medicine, you know, performing salah regularly and being around these guys and staying away from bad things, it's making me feel good. I feel good. I feel spiritually alive. I feel uplifted. And I feel like I'm in a place of belonging. And then Ramadan came, and just being part of the community and sitting there, and like all the Muslims from around the locality in Bristol, like taxi drivers, you know, and shop workers, they'd all come into this small gathering mosque. This mosque had a capacity of no more than 50 people. And we'd sit there and we'd have fatur, we'd have iftar together. Just being around those people and just kind of having that spirituality. Then I went off and I learned some more about religion, and I started memorizing Quran, that kind of stuff, basically just becoming closer to my faith. And then I started reading lots of books on the Prophet, right? And that really led me down the path of I wanted to be just like him. And so that kind of was what prompted me to grow my beard. And so I kept it. I grew it at the age of 21, 22, and then I kept it. I think when I came back home at the age of 22 and I graduated, it was a real shock for my parents to see what I looked like. I had a huge beard. It was almost up to my chest. Very shortly after that, I went to law school in central London, and then I started my training contract at the age of 23, and I still had the huge beard on my face. But I kind of felt that this was my identity.
Did it also make it harder for you now to fit in? Because I imagine you're working in London, you're commuting on the trains, and I can only presume you're working in a very English law firm.
Yeah.
And people who look like you don't work in places like that. Am I right?
I still remember the first day of my training contract. It was, I think, like the 1st September 2007. And I rocked up to the offices of the law firm which I was training at. I looked very smart. I was wearing my suit, I was wearing my tie, shirt. And I could tell that the head of human resources, who had just interviewed me 2 years ago in 2005, when I'd done my internship at this law firm, just didn't recognize me. I didn't realize until I started working there how much of a challenge it would be. There was no facility for prayer there. So I had to use a medical room to basically pray there regularly. You didn't really talk about Ramadan or fasting. There were a couple other Muslim lawyers within the organization who became my mentors and were really, really helpful and kind and nice. So that kind of kept you a little bit more felt like you belonged somewhere. But generally, the looks that you got from people in this very, very English law firm was unsettling. And so the way that I kind of tried to get around that was essentially by overcompensating and making myself out to be very, very friendly, very, very nice, polite, always joking, always chatty, always making sure that I looked really, really good. And I think I've carried that through the years now, and that's kind of defined who I am as a person. Giving that impression that I'm a professional, take me seriously, even though I've got a huge bit on my face. So there was a lot of that. But
it sounds like you're working harder.
Yeah, you're overcompensating, right? And that was always the thing. You're always trying really, really hard to basically find a way for these people to accept you.
But it sounds exhausting.
It was exhausting. I mean, I have been working as a professional now for almost 2 decades, 19 years. Decided to remove my beard in the last year and a half.
I was going to ask you about that, Shahbaz.
That was a decision that I just decided to make because I just got tired.
Because here I'm thinking you did have it for 2 decades. It's how I met you. It's how the children know you.
Yeah.
And I still remember that day when you came home, completely clean shaven. And little Khadija was like, "Where's daddy? Where's your beard gone?" And yeah. I miss your beard, and where's your beard gone? And yeah. I don't think they understand like what happened.
Yeah.
And I don't think I understand either what led to that decision.
So, I mean, it had been getting shorter and shorter over the last few years.
It has, but then it has never been this short.
Yeah, I mean, this is not even a beard, right? But it had been getting shorter and shorter over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And I think that was, so the reason why it started getting shorter and shorter was because, okay, that very much came down to the fact that I recognized that, unfortunately, the beard had become a point of contention in my ability to actually climb the career ladder, being very honest, I knew it was one of the main reasons why in 2009, when I got made redundant, I think my appearance had a big part to play with that as well. It wasn't just the fact that obviously it was a great financial crisis at that point, so people were losing jobs, but I think my appearance played a part in making the decision very easy for them to not offer me a job as well. It wasn't the only reason, but it was, I think, part of it as well. No one really knows how exhausting it is having a huge beard on your face and walking into a corporate environment and being constantly judged and frequently berated, not necessarily in an aggressive manner, but in a joking kind of manner. It is something which becomes quite exhausting and something which then starts to shape the way that you think about yourself. You almost start to believe the things that people would say. So if someone, for example, sees in the corridor and says, "Ya matawa," right? It's like they are saying that to you in a derogatory kind of way. They're making fun of you. They're not saying "Ya matawa" and someone that's basically like a bitter person in a nice way. They're saying it in a kind of way as in you're an extremist, which was far from the truth. I'm not an extremist. I'm not, And I understand the rationale behind why people would behave that way, because particularly in this part of the world, unfortunately, having a big beard is seen as a political statement. Unfortunately. In the UK, in most parts of the Western world, if you have a big beard on your face, it's not seen as a political statement. It's seen as a fact. It is seen as a mark of love and reverence towards the Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I didn't grow my beard because I wanted to make a political statement. I grew my beard because I remember sitting one day, someone gave me this beautiful book written by Martin Lings on Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I started reading it, and I literally started crying my eyes out when I was reading this book. And I was like, this man, this prophet, I want to be just like him in the way that I behave, in the way that I talk, and in the way that I look. I didn't grow because I don't have a political agenda. I could care less about political agendas. I wanted to look like the most beautiful and perfect man that walked on the face of this earth. That's the reason why I grew my beard. But it became such a source of friction in the world, and not just the working world, but also the social world as well. The amount of people that, the way they would talk to me, the way that they would basically address me, the jokes, the jibes, the stunt and career progression. And then to compound all of that, the amount of times I was getting stopped and interrogated at checkpoints, at airports. I mean, you remember, I won't name the country that we traveled to, but 3-4 years ago, we were traveling somewhere with our kids. I had the beard. And immediately, it was obviously a Muslim country, they stopped me and they wanted to take me to the side and start questioning. And the only reason why they stopped was immediately they saw that I had 3 kids around me and my wife. And they were like, okay, this guy doesn't look particularly dangerous. Let him through, essentially.
And then I says to you, walk with me, Shahbaz, walk with the children, because people are looking at you funny.
Yeah. I had been stopped at Heathrow. It was getting slightly silly. I remember one day being in a business suit. So I was going for a work-related meeting back to London. And I was in a business suit. I'd taken an overnight flight and had meetings that morning in central London. And I got stopped at Heathrow. And that was the 3rd time, I think, in the space of 3 or 4 months that I'd been stopped at Heathrow, because I was traveling back and forth to London quite a bit for work. And I looked at the officer and I said to him, I said, look, can I have a very honest conversation with you? And he said, yeah, sure. I said, this is the 3rd time I've been stopped in 3 months. Why? I said, I am a solicitor, a practicing solicitor of England and Wales. I'm a lawyer. You can see I'm dressed professionally. You can probably see from your records that I travel back and forth quite a bit. I was in a very polite kind of way. And then they made a kind of note on their system. And funnily enough, after that, I never got stopped at Heathrow ever again. But then, I mean, that's obviously a non-Muslim country where you can understand there has been a bit of threat of, or a bit of paranoia about extremism because of what's happened in the past there. But I mean, the amount of times that unfortunately I've been stopped, and I've been very fortunate and privileged that I've traveled a lot in my life in the last 15 years, 20 years. But the amount of times I've been stopped in Muslim countries, it was getting exhausting. And on a couple of occasions, and again, you remember this, I was stopped in another Muslim country and they took me away and they interrogated me for an hour and a half. You remember, because you were sitting in the waiting room.
Yeah, I didn't even have a phone at that time.
We didn't have phones at that time.
Communicate with each other.
Yeah, it was terrifying. It was terrifying. And so the constant jibes, the way it makes you feel about yourself, and then having to overcompensate for that by, almost playing up and saying, I'm normal, I'm okay. I'm not in any way, someone that you should be worried about. All of that, playing up to it, it's exhausting. And then obviously, having these kind of hostile interactions regularly. And then you get to a point in your life where you're like, I've got children. I've got a young family. And I don't want my daughters seeing me stopped at an airport. I just think how terrifying it would be for them if we're going to visiting another country and I get stopped and interrogated just because of the fact that I've got a beard on my face. How scary is that for my children to see? And so there was that as well. But I think the final kind of nail in the coffin, which kind of led me to then decide one day that I was going to shave my beard off, was I was sitting with my brother-in-law one day, 6 months ago in the summer, and we got talking, and I said to him, honestly, I said, I really am thinking about doing this, and I've been thinking about doing it for the last year or so, or 2 years, because I was like, I don't feel as if I'm doing it anymore for the right reasons. I said, I'm almost doing it because I feel like if I shave my beard off, people are going to judge me. And my brother-in-law, an incredibly insightful man. And he said to me, Shahbaz, he goes, then the sincerity behind why you grew your beard is no longer there. Because now you have the beard on your face because you want to keep up an appearance that you are pious and religious. And if that's the reason why you have the beard on your face now, not because of the real intention behind why I grew it 20 years ago, then it makes no difference whether you have it on your face or not. That was like a light bulb moment for me when I was like, I then had to check my intention. I was like, well, the reason why I have it now is not because of the fact that I want to basically, because of my love for the Prophet, which I still have in my heart, obviously, but it's because I'm scared that if I shave it off, people are going to basically judge me. And I've got to the point in my life where I'm like, I don't care about people judging me anymore. And so I just decided that was the moment that I was going to shave it off. And it's been liberating. It really has. But many of my friends have asked me, do I regret it? I don't. Do people still judge me? Yeah, they probably do. And do you know what? Honestly, I don't care. I really don't care. I'm still the same person. I still pray 5 times a day. I still fast. I still take my religion seriously. I still, love being a Muslim. I don't care if you think less of me because I have a beard, don't have a beard on my face. That's your problem, not mine anymore.
So Shahbaz, I'm thinking about the time when you came back from university and you had the beard on your face and your parents were, rightfully so, a bit concerned. So imagine now if our 12-year-old Zakaria said to you that I'm considering, well, not at 12, but later on in life, I would like to keep a big beard.
Yeah.
What would you advise him?
I would inform him of the challenges that he would have to potentially see. I think what's becoming quite apparent to me, and it's scary, we talk about this obviously because we're raising our kids in this time now, the world in many ways is becoming scarier. And you're seeing certain patterns of populism emerge in parts of the world where a certain demographic is being targeted again. And our children are growing up in that world now. I guess I would try and give him as much information as possible before he decided to take that decision. I would explain to him the challenges that I faced, how difficult it was for me. I would explain to him the impact it had on me psychologically. We don't talk about this, but having a huge beard on my face was a big burden to carry. Psychologically, it impacted me a lot because it made me think less of myself, which is sad. And the reason why it made me think less of myself was because of the way that people perceived me. So I almost started believing that I was incapable, started seeing myself as an imposter, started seeing myself as someone that was not smart or intelligent or being able to do things just because of the way that I looked. And I also gave up on myself. I started gaining a tremendous amount of weight, became very, very large. I was not in a good place mentally at certain parts of when I had a huge beard because of the kind of way I was being treated. And it wasn't open abuse, but it was like, just behind closed doors, the kind of comments, the smirks, the snarky comments, a lot of that. And it really impacted me, I think. Really, and I'm a sensitive person. I may not come across sensitive, but I am. So these things, even though I tried very hard to develop a thick skin, really did impact me. I internalized a lot of it. So I would tell my son about all these things. And I would also explain to him that having a huge beard on your face does not make you a better Muslim. And I mean that. I think the most important thing in life is trying to be the best version of yourself and being good to people and treating people with honor and respect and love. So those are the things that I would tell my son if he decided to take that decision. Then if he decided to take that decision afterwards, he is an adult and he has to walk his own path and experience life the way that he can. I can't protect him. He's got to basically learn things for himself.
So Shahbaz, I'm hearing these challenges that you faced growing up and also in your working career.
Yep.
And then I'm thinking about the challenges that we face raising a young family, looking after an aging parent, and all of the stresses of life. Putting all of that together, have you ever experienced burnout or any kind of mental health issues?
A lot. I think I have had episodes of really struggling with my mental health for a number of years. In my late 20s and in my early and mid 30s as well. I think at that point in time, I think your brain is not quite at that level of maturation where you can kind of appreciate what you're going through. I wasn't really able to recognize that I was having these challenges, psychologically. I mean, just to give some context, I grew up in a household where at the age of 40, so around the same age that I am today, my mother was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And obviously she didn't have the education or the understanding of how to manage it that well. And then that unfortunately led to her becoming increasingly sick. When she was around in her mid-50s, in 2008, she had a very horrific stroke and a heart attack shortly after we got married. Very shortly after we got married. We were on our honeymoon, you remember. And then obviously the year after that, I got made redundant, or I lost my job because of the great financial crisis. So you can imagine living in a house where your mum is there, very, very unwell. At one point, you didn't think she was going to make it through, basically. She was that unwell. Newly married, in debt. You experience Lehman Brothers collapse and the great financial crisis. And then shortly after that, you get told you're not going to be offered a job. Dealing with those kind of things are not easy. And then obviously, when we decided to leave the UK in 2009, we obviously moved to Cairo for a year. The guilt of feeling as if you were abandoning your parents, that stayed with me. And I carried that all the way from Cairo to Dubai to Abu Dhabi, where we live now. And it was crippling. I think one of the most difficult things I had to deal with from a mental point of view is constantly feeling guilty that I had left my very, very unwell mother in the UK and gone off and created a life for myself in the UAE and left her there. And it's something which I've really struggled to deal with. And it was very hard for me to kind of come to terms with that, especially when she died in 2018. And you remember that because we got the phone call. We were in Mecca, December 2018. And we got the phone call. We had to travel all the way back. So that was, from a mental health point of view, very, very hard to deal with, coupled with obviously raising a young family and having responsibilities and whatnot. Interestingly enough, though, that after she passed away, you know how they say, فَإِنَّ مَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, with every difficulty there's ease. I felt lighter after she passed away because all of that burden and that guilt, it was no longer there because the person that I felt so guilty about leaving behind and not being there for was no longer there in my life anymore. So in many ways that was liberating. But going back to your point on have I ever experienced burnout? Yeah, I think a combination of those things. And then obviously after mum passed away, we decided as a family the most important thing in the last couple of years, 2-3 years, was for our aging father to basically move in with me. So he moved to Abu Dhabi with us. And that, coupled with, raising a young family, the responsibilities of providing, dealing with my own issues when it comes to people pleasing, minimizing myself, overcompensating, just shrinking. Imposter syndrome was a big one for me. And then just dealing with the challenges, having all of those issues, and then dealing with the challenges of just what life throws at you. You know, my own health, relationships, whether they're personal or professional. And it got to a point, I think, where I started feeling it, I started seeing it, I started having a lot of arrhythmia. You know, went to the hospital to get checked out back in 2024, and they wanted to carry out an ablation, a cardiac procedure to kind of fix it. And then we went to see another expert in London, basically, to kind of look into that, and he kind of deduced that it was essentially just down to the fact that I was chronically stressed and I was internalizing everything. And so that's what led to that path of going down the route of therapy. You know, when, you know, family members came around me and suggested that I need to talk to someone about what I'm going through, the issues that I'm going through, challenges I'm going through, and why it is that I feel the way that I do. Yeah.
It's interesting because they talk about burnout or mental health issues as something just psychological, but I was with you. Yours was so symptomatic physically, and I know you had the issues with the heart and the arrhythmia, but there was so much more going on, Shahbaz. You were really struggling, and I think I'd like you to share with the audience like what it actually looked like, that period of your life.
Yeah, I mean, look, the summer of 2025 was probably, the summer of 2024 was probably the lowest point in my life. I really hit rock bottom in that sense because my health was so poor. I was having the worst kind of arrhythmia, the worst kind of palpitations. And we had identified why it was happening. So that was a good thing. So that was in a kind of way of relief. But I essentially had a nervous breakdown from all the pressures of life, you know, so many things. It wasn't just one thing. So many personal and professional things were going on. And, you know, insomnia. You'll remember I would wake up randomly at 2 or 3 in the morning every day, and my heart would be racing and my mind would be racing, and I just could not go back to sleep. And I would literally start pacing, because we were in London at that point, pacing the back garden at 3 o'clock in the morning for like an hour and a half, and then tire myself out to the point that I was so exhausted of pacing back and forth for 2 hours. Then I would come back to bed and I'd actually be able to go to sleep again. I just randomly, I remember sitting there randomly, and I would feel such a sense of overwhelm that I felt like just finding a way of running away from my own body. So I could not sit still. I could not sit still because my nerves were just always so on edge, and I was so, I was so exhausted in terms of my nervous system that I couldn't sit still with my thoughts. I literally had to find things to keep myself preoccupied.
Your breathing was off as well, wasn't it?
You're right. You're right. I couldn't breathe. I sometimes had times when I felt as if my heart was going to stop, or I was going to stop breathing. I was really struggling with my breathing. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd wake up because I couldn't breathe properly, and then I'd have to like really take deep breaths. I lost my appetite. You remember how much weight I lost around that time? Lost my hair, which is still not kind of grown back to the same level as it used to. And that was very much stress induced, I think, because I look at my dad. My dad still got his hair and he's in his 80s. So I think that hopefully, inshallah, it'll grow back at some point because it's quite thin now. But I think that was stress related. And then obviously had to go on antidepressants, had to take antidepressants for a few months just to
Did they help?
They did, but they did in certain ways. I mean, obviously antidepressants have side effects, right? But what they helped was they helped to calm down my heart. I was having a lot of arrhythmias, so whenever I'd take an antidepressant, it would kind of just calm me down so that my heart rate would kind of just stabilize and normalize. Because what ended up happening was that whenever I'd get some emotionally charged news, or if I'd become emotionally charged, I then started blacking out. There were situations when I would get some news which would ordinarily not really would get me a little bit annoyed or angry, or maybe a little bit worried, but this small piece of information would come into my head, and then all of a sudden, next thing I know, I'm walking, and then I literally would just fall to the floor. And that happened a few times. Like, I remember when one day we were having dinner and I was walking from the kitchen to the living room and I had a plate of food in my hand, and I almost dropped the plate of food, basically. It just fell on the floor, right? Because I blacked out. So a lot of that happened.
I remember you said something about antidepressants that stuck with me. That you said it's like screaming into a pillow.
Yeah. So that's essentially the antidepressants that I was taking. They helped. I mean, without them, I don't think I would have recovered so quickly. But they only masked the problem. And it's like how I said to you, remember when you asked me how I felt, it's like before I was taking the antidepressants, my body was screaming. But then as soon as I started taking antidepressants, it was like as if my body was still screaming, but someone had muffled the screaming with a pillow. Someone had covered my mouth, basically, and I was still screaming. You could hear the screams, but they were muffled. And so the antidepressants helped, but didn't cure. They were just a plaster, a Band-Aid, essentially, to kind of deal with the getting better over the longer term.
So what did recovery look like to you?
A very lengthy path. I think, and that's what I think has been, every difficult thing that you go through, sometimes it can be really, really painful. But what I've come to learn from my own life experience over the last couple of years is that's when I've seen the most growth in myself. And I've learned the most about myself. So I never thought when I was in my 20s and my 30s that I would be one of those guys that would have a nervous breakdown, that would end up on antidepressants, that would have heart problems, given the fact that I exercise so much, that would end up in therapy. Just the thought of sitting in front of a shrink or a therapist and talking about your problems, it's so not the Asian or the Muslim thing to do, right? It's so stigmatized. It's such a shameful thing to do.
Does it sound like a failure, Shahbaz?
It is. It does, rather. It's such, you feel like you have clearly, something's gone so horribly wrong. You failed as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a colleague. You failed. That's how I felt, And I beat myself up a lot about it, and that's one thing that I think my therapist identified about me is the fact that I have no self-compassion. And I've had to really teach myself that. Teach myself to be kind to myself. When I make a mistake, don't ruminate over it for days and weeks. Don't keep saying horrible things to yourself about yourself. Forgive yourself. That's been really hard for me to learn how to do. But the road to recovery entailed me having to take antidepressants. I started seeing a therapist regularly. We worked through my issues. He guided me on what's actually going on. I did a lot of journaling, which really helped me to get things that were in my head out onto a piece of paper. My faith really helped me, reconnecting with my faith. I was always praying, but just sitting there, spending more time reflecting on life, reflecting on spirituality, sitting there with the Quran, reading it, reading the translations, reflecting on that, slowing down really helped. Giving myself a break, also removing, and this was a big one, removing toxic relationships from my life. I had a lot of people in my life that brought a humongous amount of toxicity to me. And I wasn't brave enough to cut them out. Now I've become much more selective in terms of who I befriend and who I spend time with. I spend time with people that I feel good in their company, and I feel that they give me something and I give them something in terms of energy. I don't like being around people that are essentially social vampires that suck energy out of me anymore. I'll meet them once or twice and then I'll find an excuse not to meet them, basically. And that's another thing which I've become better at, and that's been a part of the road to recovery, is the fact that it's hard, and I keep practicing. I keep practicing this point, but I've started caring less about other people. I was the kind of person that was constantly people-pleasing, worrying about other people, worrying about fixing other people's problems. Because obviously I've got an anxious attachment. Attachment style, right? So I'm always I'm not an avoidant, which is the clear opposite, but I'm always constantly trying to find ways of repairing the relationship, and I want reassurance, and I want connection, and I'm always trying to make sure that everyone around me is happy. And I've had to kind of unlearn that and say it's okay if someone is angry or upset. It's not my job to fix that person or to do anything to basically try and repair that thing. If I've done everything right, I'm not going to bend over backwards. I'm not going to compromise my self-worth or my self-dignity. I'm not going to humiliate myself by begging and asking and pleading anymore. I'm not going to basically try and always be the bigger person and basically try and go and ask for forgiveness when I've done nothing wrong. And I've had to unlearn those things. And many people may argue that, okay, what you're basically practicing now is more a form of narcissism or selfishness. And my argument to them is, well, practicing the other side of it is, well, essentially letting me to have a nervous breakdown. So, yeah.
I think I'm listening to your story and I can't help but think that I don't think your experience is unique, the burnout, the mental health issues. Yet when I reflect on our community or my friend circles, I never hear of the stories of sitting down about their husbands maybe experiencing this, their brothers or their fathers. This isn't a subject that gets spoken about. Why do you think that is?
It's not just cultural. This is not just a Pakistani or a Muslim issue. This is actually a phenomenon that I've seen in all cultures, in professional circles and in personal circles, in the corporate world as well. I don't know why. And you probably have to ask someone that's got some expertise or knowledge in this, but I don't know why. But society almost expects men to have themselves together, basically. Society expects men to be strong, to be not talk about their problems, to deliver, to be a provider. There's a lot more pressure on men. And I think a lot of the time we have to sometimes watch ourselves, be a bit more careful about how we behave and what we say. And that's a good thing. But I think generally in a society where men are supposed to be strong and we're not supposed to talk about our problems, who do you turn to? And mental health is so stigmatized. If you talk about your problems, unless you've got really good friends, but if you talk about your problems with third parties or with random people or with colleagues, they don't want to hear about it. That's the first thing. There's no support network there for individuals that are going through mental health crises. Now, for men, that's even more compounded because of the expectations that society places upon us, right? And particularly in the circles of men, what I've found is if you try and talk to other men about it, particularly men that have chauvinistic kind of qualities, they'll almost berate you for it. They'll make fun of you for it. Sometimes they'll even get aggressive towards you. So you can't really talk to them about it.
So you don't find a safe space with them?
There is no safety. There are not enough safe spaces for men to talk about their problems. We are not promoting enough that it's acceptable and it's okay for men to talk about what's going through with them and that their problems are not just, they're not alone. Problems are not just isolated to them. All men go through these kind of issues. All men go through crises in faith or their jobs or whatever and have challenges with family and marriages and whatnot. There's no support network available for men. In fact, on the contrary, if you talk about it, you're seen as weak. Men are programmed to not show even the smallest glimmer of vulnerability. I feel stupid or silly if I make myself vulnerable in front of certain people in certain circles. I'm beyond the point of caring. I frankly don't care anymore, because I want to be true to myself, and I don't want to put a mask on my face, basically, which is what I see with a lot of people around the world that I work with and also that I interact with on a daily basis. I choose to be who I am and true to myself, and if people don't want to accept that, that's fine, that's their problem. And if that means they don't want to be my friend or don't want to work with me, then fine, so be it. I'd much rather be around people that actually accept me for who I am. But I see it all the time. No one really wants to basically connect with you and really hear about your problems. And that's particularly the case with men. So there's never been a safe space. There are very few safe spaces for men to actually talk about their issues. And that's something that's the reason why I decided to do this with you. I mean, this has not been easy for me. But, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to put myself here right now, make myself vulnerable, say that it's been hard. And I know I'm not the only man that's gone through these kind of issues. I know because in private circles, men have spoken to me, but privately. I'm not willing to talk about it publicly, but privately said, I've gone through my issues as well.
So I'm glad you've came, and I'm glad you've shared, because by sharing one story, it gives permission to other people to share their stories too.
Yeah.
So I want to end, Shahbaz, by asking you, if you could speak to that young Shahbaz, the one that didn't know that he would be an expat, he would grow a big beard, and he would face the challenges that you did, what would you like him to hear?
Well, first of all, the thing I will say, I wouldn't say this to him, but I reflect back on my own life. I'm very lucky. I know for the last hour and a half, 2 hours, we've been talking about problems and issues and challenges and that kind of stuff. And it may come across as the fact that I've had a very miserable life. Far from it. I've had a lot of friction in my life. But that friction has been a source of tremendous growth and opportunity and privileges and blessings that I could not have even imagined. And you and I, we talk about this often. We sometimes talk about, look at where we live, look at the life we live, look at what we've been blessed with. Did you imagine when we were newly married in 2009 in my parents' house, in my bedroom, newly married, that we would be where we are in 2026? I mean,
I didn't even imagine.
It feels like a dream, right? Alhamdulillah, it's been amazing, and it's been the proudest moment of my life is building that together. Obviously very grateful that God has given me the opportunity to do that, and the opportunities obviously come from Him. He's the one that provides. But deeply proud of the fact that we've built that. I've had a big part to play in building the life that we have. And it is beyond the wildest expectations of that young Shahbaz. I mean, he wanted to be a rich investment banker, so that didn't quite happen or pan out. But, I've accumulated wealth in other ways. I've got 3 beautiful kids. I've got my health. I love working out. I still do things, even though I'm in my 40s, which I shouldn't do, like ice skating. Learning how to ice skate is not a great idea, particularly when you're 41, 42, and falling on your elbows regularly, which is very painful, by the way. Learning how to play piano at the age of, in my late 30s, because I've always wanted to do it. So I feel deeply privileged that I have got to live, and I'm living such a rich and wonderful life. And yes, it has challenges, but what doesn't have challenges? And is it would you value it any more or any less if you didn't have those challenges? It's what makes you appreciate it, right? But going back to the question of what I would tell that young Shahbaz, I think I would advise him very similar to how I advise myself now, which is, don't worry so much. Don't be anxious as much. The young Shahbaz was always worried about money, and always worried about being successful, and always worried or scared about not being able to make it, and always worried about his mum's health. It all worked out in the end. Okay, there were difficult times in there as well, but everything worked out. And even when things have been really, really dark, and this, I'm currently going through a period of my life right now where I am going through a transition. it's terrifying. And it's a forced transition. I didn't choose to be in the circumstances that I am right now. But I am in the circumstances I am right now. And it's scary. It causes a lot of anxiety. So I would say to him, don't be so worried all the time. Don't be so nervous or anxious. Things have a way of working out. Have patience. Have faith. I would tell him, don't be so hard on yourself. Don't beat yourself up so much. Find a way to just own a mistake you've made and then just move on. The funny thing, I've worked with so many people in my life. The most successful people that I've worked with, they have this amazing ability of, when they make a mistake, they go, yeah, I made a mistake. And then within 5 minutes or maybe an hour, they're over it and they've moved on. They've learned the lessons from it, and they're back and they're fully focused on what they're doing ahead. And I've always struggled with that because I ruminate over the mistakes I made, or I ruminate over something that's happened. If I had done this differently, would that have happened? If I had just done this, if I had just done that, maybe this would have happened. Maybe that would have still been the same way, whatever. And sometimes you just have to accept things for how they are. Things work out the way they do because that's just the way life is. So I think those are all things that I would say to him. Stop people pleasing. You're not going to be able to make everyone happy. And I think that's been a really difficult and painful lesson for me to learn. It's taken me a nervous breakdown to get there, essentially, is stop worrying about the fact that people are not happy with you. And that's the thing about people pleasing. The more you try and please people, the more you fail at it. And the less respect you actually attract. People stop actually respecting you when you no longer put boundaries in place. I've noticed that. Being able to say no, or being able to just put your boundaries in place, something I'm still learning how to do right now.
It's a journey.
It's a journey. Still not, and I don't think I'll ever be perfect at it. But I think one of the things that's been quite wonderful over the last 2 years, having gone through all of this, the silver linings, the positives, is I've learned so much about myself as a person. I've learned so much about my mind and how it works, and recognizing when I'm psychologically going off somewhere, or when something is triggering the way that I'm thinking about something because it's a wound from when I was a kid, or a life trap. So I'm learning so much about myself, and being able to kind of disconnect from myself and looking at myself and saying to myself, no, this is why it's happening. And then kind of just dealing with it in that way, rather than actually kind of getting stuck in and getting really swamped down in that kind of issue. I don't know if that makes sense. Those are things that I've all kind of learned. And I hope that they are the things that kind of will put me in good stead for the next 20, 30, 40 years of my life, inshallah. So, yeah.
So thank you, Shahbaz, for coming and sharing your reflections and your life experiences. And I think I have to share with you that it's been such an honor watching you grow into the man that you are today. And I think, Shahbaz, one of the things I really love about you is that you never stop learning and you never stop growing. Whether that's picking up ice skating after 40 or learning how to, play the piano, You're always learning. And I love that about you. And I love that our children get to witness that too. So thank you, Shahbaz.
Thank you so much.
For those of you who are listening who might be struggling with their mental health, know that you're not alone. Sometimes just having a conversation makes all the difference. If you would like to have a chat, feel free to contact Shahbaz directly on his LinkedIn page. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like and subscribe to Reflections and Realizations so that you don't miss future episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.